5 on this to talk about this a little bit. There was a move by the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, to say he wanted to ask for a mistrial. One, he thought that because the jury had not been sequestered, that was a problem. He also then pointed to comments that we've been talking about on the channel a bit today, and that is the comments by Congresswoman Maxine Watters, in which she suggested, as you saw in that clip, maybe just before we went back to the judge, calling for a confrontation if the verdict does not turn out the way that she wants. So lots happened here. We're also waiting on a press conference. We'll take that to you live. This is the governor of Minnesota and other state officials to talk about safety in the area. As you can imagine, Minneapolis on edge, very much so. Jesse Watters, could I start with you in terms of reflections of the day, or maybe even just what we just heard? Especially the judge was probably the most critical official that we've heard to talk about the comments of Maxine Watters.
He called those comments abhorrent and really admonished her, says she wasn't respecting the balance of power and wasn't respecting her oath to uphold the Constitution. But he didn't say that that would trigger a mistrial, and I'm sure defense will use that on appeal if that's the case. If you look at what Maxine Watters said, it's definitely more explicit and more insightful than what President Trump said on January 6th. But do I think the House is going to vote to expel her? Absolutely not. She has a get-out-of-jail-free card, and no one's going to touch a hair on her head. I do think, just looking at this trial, Chauvin's going to get convicted of all 3 charges. The defense was not able to move the trial out of the county where the crime was committed. The prosecution did a great job in jury selection, and the video is very powerful, and it speaks for itself. The murder 2 charge, Dana, that doesn't even have to be intentional. It just can be unintentional. Just the fact that the knee was on the neck in a felony manner caused the death, and not even the sole cause of death, just a primary contributor to the death. The 3rd-degree murder charge, again, not the sole contributor, just a dangerous act, the knee on the neck. And then the 2nd-degree manslaughter charge, that's just basically negligence, and that's a layup for the prosecution. The only thing there, though, is if they don't do murder 2 and murder 3, which is basically 12.5 years for each one, considering Chauvin has no record, that manslaughter charge only carries 4 years. So if that's the only thing they get him on, the streets are going to go nuts, and the judge is going to be under a ton of pressure to over-sentence. That's what I worry about. And Maxine Watters did not help the situation there.
One of the things, and I want to get to Pete because, of course, he's from Minnesota, but let's just get Juan in here quickly. The defense attorney started his closing argument by reminding the jury that reasonable doubt is the standard, and that's true across trials all across America. That's the way that it is. The prosecution, though, they stood up later in the day and they said, use your common sense, believe your eyes, what you saw, you saw. And that, of course, is the video, the 9 minutes and 29-minute long video that Jesse just referenced. Juan, get your overall take on today's developments.
Well, remember, what you heard from the defense was, well, there's the possibility that it was the carbon dioxide from the running car, or there was an angry mob surrounding the events as they took place, Dana. And so I think that the defense was trying to, some said, muddy the waters with some of this, and trying to get people away from the idea of, as the prosecution said, seeing what they saw with their eyes and heard with their ears from the witnesses. To me, picking up on what Jesse was just talking about, I thought the prosecution's case was very strong. But, it's rare that a policeman gets convicted in the United States. We tend to give them the benefit of the doubt in these situations. But in this case, I think if you listen to the prosecution, you listen to the defense, you'd have to say that if Derek Chauvin is not prosecuted here and found guilty, then a policeman can basically do anything to an American citizen, especially to a black man, without any repercussions, because it is such an egregious act. As to Maxine Watters, not Jesse, as to Maxine Watters, clearly what she did was wrong, I don't think we need any more violence here. I don't think violence is even going to help the case of people who are upset about what happened to George Floyd. I think it would, in fact, dilute attention on the real problem, which is police brutality, and instead allow people to talk about rioting or disruptions in the streets.
So then, Pete, if I can go to you, I just want to read one other thing to you from Eric Nelson, the defense attorney. He said, a reasonable police officer understands the intensity of the struggle. And he talked about the fact that there was this chaos that was going on in the situation, and that George Floyd was resisting. I want to get your take on that, but also we're waiting on this press conference from the governor of Minnesota and local officials there in Minneapolis. Given your knowledge of the area, give us a sense of what that might feel like tonight.
Well, it's going to be a tense scene, no doubt. Watching all of it today, and I really get the chance to do that, I'm going to disagree with my good friend Jesse Watters and say that I think the defense did as good of a job as possible of attempting to introduce reasonable doubt. Watching the jury trial today reaffirmed a lot of why the American justice system is a beautiful thing. For all the threats, the irresponsible ones of Maxine Watters, for all the talk of race on the outside, there wasn't one mention of race inside the courtroom, except for this sort of odd implicit bias sermon that the judge gave at the end. Other than that, the defense and the state stayed away from it and made their best possible case. And the defense ultimately introduced that reasonable officer standard that you mentioned. The defense used body cam footage of the officers more often. The state used people that were watching the perspective. Ultimately, the defense tried to humanize the decisions of Chauvin. Not that you can defend what happened for the 9 minutes and 29 seconds, but what about the almost 20 minutes before that where he's absorbing information and trying to determine what the right decision is, and they went minute by minute of the decisions he was making when he called the EMT, that he did not escalate force. If he's talking, he's breathing. I'm not justifying it, but the defense did a strong job making a case in front of a jury. 6 minority members, 6 white members. It's not the judge that'll make this call. It's not the lawyers that'll make this call. It is the jury of peers. And ultimately, that reaffirms a lot of my faith in the system. Both Derek Chauvin got a fair trial today. We'll see what happens.
Katie, let me get your general thoughts. And again, just want to remind everybody we're waiting for this press conference that we'll bring to you live.
Well, first, if you watched any number of hours of this trial, and especially the closing arguments today, it's very obvious that what the American people have been told by the majority of the media in terms of this being a clear-cut case is not the case at all. It's complicated, it's nuanced, there's more video than the 9 minutes that we've been shown through social media and through news networks over the past 6 or almost year now. But the reason why the defense asked for a mistrial as a result of Congresswoman Watters' comments is because it's about tainting the jury, because she's intimidating the jury if they were to see that, given that she's in a crowd, that Minneapolis has been under siege. They've seen businesses burned down. People made threats over the weekend. You had one of the use of force witnesses on behalf of the defense, his former home was actually vandalized with animal blood and a pig's head because he's a former police officer. So this intimidation is an issue, especially because the jury was not sequestered away from media. And in a time where social media and these kinds of issues bleed into all of the other news items that we're talking about, into culture as well, it's pretty astonishing that the judge did not require that the jury stay away from media, other than just saying, hey, don't turn on the news. Well, not turning on the news is not the only way people get information.
Yeah,
so
it's everywhere.
We'll see what happens. But real quickly, in terms of what's going to happen with these officials preparing for the safety of the cities, it's not just Minneapolis and Minnesota that should be preparing. It's places in California. It's in New York. And it will be interesting to see the differences between what Ron DeSantis has said about what they will do with rioters versus what maybe the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor of Minnesota will say in terms of consequences for doing so.
Well, let's get at something from